Hey guys, thanks for tuning back into The Abyss. I'm Hallie.
And I'm Brittany.
Go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, give us a follow. We love to have you guys back every time we have a new episode out, and we want to make sure that you're continuously updated. Make sure to go and like us on Facebook at The Abyss. And then also you can follow us on The Abyss group, which is a page that is separate from our main page where we talk and discuss different cases. You can tell us things that you might have heard from a case that we didn't cover, or just give us some good feedback. We love to hear your feedback. Also, if you want to stay tuned for bloopers at the end of the episode, we have them every time, just kind of showing you something to lighten the mood a little bit. These cases can get kind of heavy, and we like to make fun of ourselves.
Today we're going to talk about two women whose tragedies are connected by one person. The case gets very convoluted as you go along.
So let's jump into The Abyss. So today we're going to start by talking about a woman named Kathleen Savio. She was born on June 13th, 1963 in Chicago, Illinois, and she was working as an accountant while pursuing her career in nursing. So she was taking classes, doing some clinicals, and she ended up getting married on May 3rd, 1992. Her and her husband had two sons, Thomas and Christopher. Things seemed to be going well with their marriage. In 2001, however, Savio received a letter telling her about the infidelity of her husband. He was cheating on her with a minor, and this was very devastating to Savio. Between 2002 and 2004, the police were called to their home 18 times for domestic disturbances, and sometimes she was ending up in the emergency room, and the police didn't file any reports. This might have been because her husband was a police officer. She had to give up her nursing opportunities because people were commenting on her black eyes and bruises, saying that she can't show up to work and lectures like that. And so she ended up giving that up and was mentioning to people that she was scared for her life.
So that's pretty sad to be in a program like that and have it to stop because of abuse. And
not to mention that anyone who knows about that stuff, it's so competitive to get into the nursing programs, any type of doctor programs, medical field in general.
It seems like instead of being offered help or concern, she was kind of just told, you can't be seen like that.
In 2002, they were going to trial for a divorce. Savio and her soon-to-be ex-husband were having some confrontations, and Kathleen filed a police report claiming that her husband had been assaulting her and threatening her, and that she wanted an order of protection so that way he couldn't come and attack her. But after talking to her husband, they agreed that if they just dropped it and just stayed away from each other, then that would be fine, and that an order of protection wasn't needed. On October 10th, 2003, the divorce was finalized, but they still had to have a trial to divide up their assets, and it was scheduled for January 12th, 2004, but it kept getting moved and moved and moved, and then it eventually was scheduled for April 6th, 2004. And the ex-husband was not very happy to be paying child support. He caused a lot of trouble in this case and scared Savio because of how aggressive he was being. Savio's ex-husband and his girlfriend would also start to harass and verbally and physically attack Savio while she was alone and while she was in front of her children. They just didn't care. They were doing it whenever. And Savio stated, quote, "He knows how to manipulate the system, and his next step is to take my children or kill me instead," end quote. If you ever have a speculation that your husband or ex-husband or anyone is going to kill you, like, that's just bad news.
Yeah, and we know from domestic abuse situations that the most dangerous time for an abused woman is when they leave. So I think her fears were definitely founded, and the fact that he was a police officer and kind of knew how that worked, knew people in the police department and all that stuff, she had reason to be scared.
Absolutely. After this divorce was finalized, she tried to get back into what she loved to do, and she went back to nursing. But unfortunately, Kathleen was not there for very long before something disastrous occurred.
On March 1st, 2004, which was a Monday morning, Savio was found dead in her bathtub. It looked as though it was an accidental drowning. There was no sign to forced entry or theft, so it didn't look like foul play was involved. She was found on her left side in the bathtub at 10:45 a.m. Her hair was wet and blood-soaked, and there was dry, coagulated blood at the bottom of the tub. Rigor mortis had already passed, so she had been there for a little bit, and the body was cold. A friend had heard from Kathleen on Saturday, and then on Sunday, her ex-husband tried to reach out to her. He had the kids that weekend as part of their custody agreement, so he was getting in contact with her to arrange when he was going to drop the kids off, but he never heard from her at all on Sunday. And then Monday morning was when she was found. Forensics indicated that Savio had died early Sunday morning and that she had been dead at least 24 hours when she was found that Monday. The autopsy was performed by Prosecutor Brian R. Mitchell. He found a 1-inch blunt force laceration on the back of her head, 5 scraping abrasions, and 6 blunt force contusions on her extremities, abdomen, and buttocks. Mitchell said that the laceration was caused by the fall, that the scratches on her back were due to her body rubbing up against the side of the tub, and that the bruises were old and not relevant to this situation. There were no drugs or alcohol in her system, and the x-ray showed no fractures of her head or extremities or trunk. The lungs showed edema, so there was evidence of drowning, and it was ruled an accidental drowning. They just thought she fell in the tub and drowned as the water was draining, and that's why there was no water in the tub when she was found. This turns out to not necessarily appropriately justify this incident, and we'll talk about that again later.
Also, there is a picture on our website of the crime scene. Kathleen Savio's body is in the picture. It's got a little bit of censored, but it is kind of graphic, so if you go and look at it, make sure you're using viewer discretion. But if you would like to see the picture, it is on our website.
Steve, Kathleen's boyfriend at the time, says that he had seen her naked just a few days prior and that none of these marks were on her body. She didn't have any bruises or any weird marks. So he thought it was really strange that these bruises were said to have happened way before this incident took place. On November 13th, 2007, Kathleen Savio's body was exhumed and another autopsy was performed by Lawrence W. Bloom. Later, there was a third autopsy performed by Michael M. Baden. Baden stated, quote, "It is my opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that the drowning of Miss Savio, a healthy adult, in a bathtub with multiple blunt force injuries indicative of a struggle, should be properly classified as a homicide." So in her case, Bloom testified that the scratches on her back could not have been from rubbing up against the side of the tub because it's a smooth surface and it wouldn't produce scratches. And he also said that the bruises on her body had to have happened within 24 hours of her death. So with that in mind, it was later ruled a homicide.
Now we're going to jump a little bit to another woman named Stacy Cales. She was born on January 20th, 1984 in Downers Grove, Illinois. Stacy had a really hard upbringing at times. 6 weeks before she was born, her family's home burned down, and her sister Jessica didn't make it out of the house and died in the fire. Anthony, Stacy's father, started drinking a lot more, and he and Christy, which was Stacy's mother, started to fight a lot more. Anthony was blaming Christy for the fire, and there was a time where he waved a gun in Christy's face, so things were getting a little aggressive, a little violent, and not a very healthy environment for children. Stacy's cousin's biological mother said, quote, "There were drugs, alcohol, and physical abuse in that family," end quote. In 1985, Christy gave birth to Cassandra Cales, and 2 years after that, she gave birth to Lacey Cales, who then died of SIDS. So she had another sister's death. Very hard so far in her life.
Yeah, a lot of loss in that family in a short period of time.
Stacy's neighbor, Roland Henderson, said, quote, "We used to see Stacy running around here without any clothes except her diaper in the middle of winter. Her mother would be sleeping on the couch and Stacy would run out the front door."
And it's cold in Illinois in the winter. It's very, very cold.
Christy was known to disappear for weeks at a time also. She was in and out of psych hospitals. She was arrested for shoplifting, alcohol, and cigarettes, and she had a DUI. So things were a little chaotic. I'm sure her mother was very traumatized from losing 2 children. The way Anthony probably treated her wasn't great. So there was a lot of stress going on in this family. And in 1990, Anthony and Christy faced 2 foreclosures. Anthony ended up filing for divorce, and Christy didn't want that, but she ended up missing all the court dates, and so the court finalized the divorce anyway. Anthony got custody of Stacy, Cassandra, their son Yelton, and Tina. Stacy went on with her life and ended up graduating high school early at the age of 16 in 1998. The same year, her mother went missing. The kids were determined that she had been murdered by the guy she was living with. The man she was living with had said that Christy went to church, but she just never came back. They found that strange because her purse and her other personal belongings were still at his house, something that you would think she would take with her to church or to the grocery store or anywhere. She would just grab her purse and go. Cassandra took initiative and went to the cops about the situation, but they never really looked into the disappearance. Stacy was devastated. She refused to talk about her mother. She was already going through a lot, and life had been really hard on her. She decided that she wanted to be a nurse, but she didn't have money for school, so she took on little small jobs here and there. In 2001, she was 17 years old and working as a desk clerk at this hotel in Bolingbrook when she ended up meeting this man. She fell in love, and she married him on October 19th, 2003. When they married, they had a 3-month-old son named Anthony, and 2 years after marriage, they had a daughter named Lacey. Stacy ended up adopting the 2 kids from her husband's previous relationship, and she had this big family at a very young age. She was in the nursing program at Juliet Junior College, and people were happy for her. The family was happy, and everything seemed fine until things got a little bit deeper. It turns out that her new husband was very controlling. He didn't want her to work. He wouldn't watch the kids while she was at school for exams or taking classes or anything like that. And he would even follow her to the grocery store and watch her while she was with her friends because he was so paranoid that she would be cheating on him or going against his will. This was really troubling for Stacy, and along with that, her half-sister Tina had died of cancer in 2006, and her brother was continuously in and out of jail, and this just really made Stacy start to reevaluate her life and where she was going and what she wanted. She started going to church with the kids, and she became an Avon rep, and she was trying to kind of straighten up her life a little bit.
One night, Stacy woke up to find that her husband was missing. She called him, there was no answer, but eventually, after midnight, he comes back. He was dressed in all black, and he goes to the washing machine, takes off his clothes, puts them in. He had a bag with him, and he takes the clothes out of the bag and puts them in the washing machine. To Stacy, they look like women's clothing. She thought this was pretty weird. It's kind of an alarming thing to happen.
Yeah, even if he wasn't coming in late, to come in with another woman's clothing in a bag is very peculiar.
The next day was the day that Kathleen Savio was found dead in her bathtub. And one interesting thing connected these 2 women. Kathleen Savio had been married to Drew Peterson, who was Stacy's husband.
Drew had been married multiple times before Stacy, and his first wife was Carol Brown. They were high school sweethearts, and they had gone to prom together, and they ended up marrying in 1974. She had a miscarriage at 5 months with their child, and she described Drew as being so supportive, so helpful. He would bring her food in bed, and he would help take care of her when she needed it. She thought that he was just being a great husband. And they ended up having 2 sons later named Stephen and Eric. Drew then joined the Army as a military police officer, and he was honorably discharged in 1976. Peterson then became a police officer for the Bolingbrook Police Department in 1977. In 78, he worked in narcotics, and in 79, he was named Policeman of the Year, but he ended up retiring in 2006. Carol Brown had said that Drew Peterson never threatened her or abused her over their 6 years together. He was a charming teenager when they met, but she could see how he would go back and forth from being super charming to being kind of controlling, and later discovered that he was unfaithful, and she divorced him in 1980.
In 1982, Drew Peterson married Vicky Connelly. They met in a bar in the early 80s, and once they were married, Vicky noticed increasingly controlling behaviors from Drew. He threatened her. Connelly stated that Drew told her he could kill her and make it look like an accident. After this incident, Connelly went to a police officer in Bolingbrook that she considered a friend and kind of laid out the situation and said, hey, this threat was made and I just wanted somebody to know in case something happens. Connelly said Drew would hit her from time to time, but not hard enough to go to the hospital, and it wasn't a consistent thing. It was just here and there. And she stated, quote, it was mind game. It was head games. I did not know when it was coming or not. She also stated, quote, we had bugs in our house. He put a microphone in our kitchen and taped our conversations. He was cheating so much that he wanted to make sure I wasn't. His whole thing with us is that I need to know my family is safe at home and you're not going to be doing anything you shouldn't be doing. And that enabled him to do whatever he wanted. end quote. Even through all of this, Vicky stayed with him through the infidelity until she saw with her own eyes that he was cheating on her. She ended up divorcing him in 1992.
His third wife was then Kathleen Savio, who was the woman found in the tub, and his fourth wife was Stacy Cales, who is now Stacy Peterson. Stacy started telling people that she wanted a divorce, but she was so scared. She didn't know what he would do to her. This just made her really nervous. Stacy and Drew's neighbor, Sharon Pachowski, said, quote, "She said to many of us, not just me in confidence, many of us, that if anything happened to her, it was not an accident, that he had killed her," end quote. And I'm sure after him coming in late at night and then hearing about Savio's death and him knowing Savio, that probably freaked her out even more and made her even more on edge. So in August 2007, Stacy went and spoke with a preacher about how Peterson had told her to provide a false alibi for the night of Savio's death, kind of giving him a way out. The Reverend testified and said that before she went missing, that Stacy had told him, quote, "I live with a murderer," end quote. This is horrifying. Same thing with Savio saying that she believed that he would have killed her, that if that's ever in question, there's something going wrong.
Stacy and her sister Cassandra had plans in late October of 2007. So Cassandra called her to confirm those plans. Stacy never got back to her. So on October 29th, 2007, Cassandra reported her sister missing. Drew Peterson claims Stacy had called him at 9 p.m. that Sunday to say that she was leaving. She didn't want to be with him anymore. She had met somebody else and she was running off with another man. She told him that she left her car at the local airport. He was the last one to see her, and he walked to the airport and got her car and brought it back. Also in October 2007, Drew's son Steven, who also worked for the police department, hid guns and cash for his dad, which would come up in the case later. Drew Peterson's friend, Rick Mims, admitted to police that he and Drew had bought 3 blue plastic containers from a cable company where they both had worked part-time. He even gave pictures of these containers to police. After this, however, Rick Mims sold his story to a tabloid, so it kind of calls his credibility into question. Was he just doing this for a quick buck, or did he want fame? Or it's a little bit questionable, I guess, to sell your story right after. But this story is corroborated by the testimony of Thomas Morphy, who is Drew's stepbrother. He says on October 27th, 2007, Drew approached him about concerns he had with Stacy. And while they were talking about Stacy, Drew brought up murder. He asked if Thomas could live with himself if he had killed someone, and Thomas said no, he didn't think he could do that. And Drew asked, well, could you live with it if you knew about a murder but didn't necessarily commit it? And Thomas said, yeah, he thought he could deal with that. But later that day, he called Drew and they talked, and he said no, he didn't really want any part of that. He didn't want to know anything, and that he was just uncomfortable with the whole situation.
Which is really interesting, thinking that the conversation they had must have been so serious that he felt the need to call him and let him know, like, hey,
yeah,
I don't really agree with that anymore. Like, I thought I could, but I don't want to anymore.
Like, it definitely wasn't stated in a joking way or some kind of dark humor. It was just
blatantly asked.
Yeah, enough that he felt very, very uncomfortable with it. The next day, on October 28th, Peterson took Morphy to the park and he handed him a cell phone, and Morphy didn't know whose phone it was or anything, but he was instructed, don't answer it. Even if it rings, don't answer it. And he just leaves him at the park and goes about his day. During this time, a couple calls come through on the phone. They both say that they're from Stacy's phone, but Thomas Morphy follows directions. He doesn't answer it. And a little while later, Drew picks him up and he takes him to the Peterson house. Thomas Morphy then helps Drew move some of these blue barrels from his bedroom into his SUV. And Drew then told Thomas, don't talk about this to anybody. This never happened. Just don't ever mention this again. But Thomas Morphy was very unsettled with the conversation, with what he had just done. He felt very, very concerned. He called one of his friends and told him that he thinks he just helped dispose of Stacy's body. This was also corroborated by a neighbor who said they saw Drew and another man carry 55-gallon barrels out of the house. Cassandra, Stacy's sister, also claims to have seen these barrels in the garage a couple days before Stacy's disappearance. So on October 29th, Morphy calls Peterson, and he was in a really bad state. He said he wanted to hang himself, that he felt very guilty. He started drinking heavily and ended up overdosing on prescription pills. This was because he felt really guilty about what had happened, what he thinks he helped Drew do, and he just couldn't handle it.
I feel like that's an extreme too, to just jump to if you weren't sure that you helped with something illegal.
Yeah, he went very intense very quickly with it, and so you can see how heavily it was weighing on him and how bad he felt about what he feels like happened. So Thomas's brother called 911. Morphy was taken to the hospital. He ended up living, and the following day, Drew Peterson went to talk to Morphy at the hospital. Morphy was still kind of out of it at this point, and he doesn't really remember the conversation much, so we don't really know what was talked about there. But Morphy's friend talked to the police about the conversations he had had and what had happened with Morphy, and they go to the hospital right after Peterson left and talk to him. They offer him immunity if he's willing to help with their case against Drew Peterson. Drew's lawyer, Joel Brodsky, denied the missing containers existed at all. He said that never happened, no one ever saw them, that they just didn't exist. There were also reports of Drew approaching truckers, asking them to take a quote-unquote package to an undisclosed location, but police later said this was not credible, that none of these truckers were in the area at the time, and that it just wasn't a credible claim, so they dismissed it.
On October 31st, 2007, a search party happened for Stacy to see if they could find her anywhere. It was at this point when the Will County State's Attorney, James Glasgow, planned to review Savio's death, and that's when they started to do the exhumation. On November 9th, 2007, Peterson is declared a suspect in Stacy's disappearance officially, and he even took a lie detector test in May 2008. The test showed that there was deception on 3 questions. They were the last time he saw Stacy, if he knew about her whereabouts, and when they asked about the phone call in which Stacy says she is leaving him for another man. Now, I know sometimes lie detecting tests can be kind of iffy. They always say, don't take one. But if you're getting deception on 3 very, very important questions, you automatically look suspicious in the police's eyes. Drew was then arrested for possession of an illegal weapon. He owned an AR-15 rifle that was too short under the state law. Later, the state added on some additional charges because Drew illegally transferred the weapons to his son, Steven. So in July 2008, Drew pled not guilty of the weapon charges against him, and his attorney, Joel Brodsky, said that the weapon is Drew's secondary duty weapon for his service on the SWAT team, so it's therefore exempt from state laws. These allegations were dropped. The police were still keeping their eye on Drew, and they had 2 of Drew's former friends issue some wiretaps for months to spy on Drew. They claimed to record content that was damaging for Drew, but Brodsky and Drew dismissed this as a scheme for money. On September 19th, 2008, the Will County judge did confirm that Drew was under surveillance, but they didn't mention the type or the duration, so we don't know how long they were really watching him or what type, if it was wires or if it was cameras or PIs or anything like that.
In December of 2008, Drew Peterson got engaged again, this time to a woman named Christina Rains. They met at a bar, but they had actually known each other since Christina was 15 years old, and she even knew Stacy Peterson. Drew started trying to date Christina, but her father wasn't happy with this. By this time, his charges were pretty well known, and I think most fathers would maybe have some apprehension about that. But Christina believed that Drew was kind and nonviolent. She didn't think he was guilty of these crimes, and she thought that he was a great father to his kids and to her kids. During news interviews, Christina refused to talk about Stacy or any connections she thought Drew may have to her disappearance. She didn't want to answer any questions about Stacy or any of the crimes that had been alleged against Drew. In January of 2009, this engagement was called off. It was actually televised when Christina's dad went to Drew Peterson's home to collect Christina's things. After this, Christina moved back in with an ex-boyfriend who had kind of helped her see the light with Drew and see that things maybe weren't so great. And she ended up getting away from him. In April of 2009, a wrongful death suit was filed against Peterson for Kathleen Savio's death. This was filed by Savio's father and sister, and they were seeking monetary advantages of $100,000. On May 7th, 2009, after the exhumation of Kathleen Savio's body and statements made by Stacy to the Reverend were put forward, Peterson was charged with the murder of Kathleen Savio. Throughout this, he maintained his innocence and said he had no part in it. A couple of years later, on February 19th of 2011, Drew's son Stephen was under investigation for obstructing justice by hiding the evidence that we mentioned earlier, the guns and the cash, and he ended up being fired from the police department. In April of 2011, Peterson wrote letters to a female pen pal from prison, and in these letters, he offered Stacy's clothing and other personal items to this woman. So that kind of shows some of his character.
Shows the level of respect he had for Stacy as well. After the first autopsy was done on Kathleen Savio, a coroner's jury inquest was conducted, and the jury deliberated for an hour before ruling it an accidental drowning. The testimony during this inquest was a little iffy because it was provided by a state trooper who had not been at the autopsy and had not interviewed Peterson. Furthermore, one of the jurors was a police officer who knew Peterson, and he said during deliberations about Peterson that he knew him, he would never hurt his wife, he's a great guy. So it kind of biased the jury.
Yeah, that's a huge conflict of interest, and he should have known better, especially as a police officer, not to bias the jury like that. And knowing Peterson, he shouldn't have been on that jury at all. So
yeah,
that's really not good investigation, not a fair assessment of what happened.
On the day of Kathleen's funeral, Drew didn't attend the reception, and instead he decided to pull up to Savio's home and started removing some of her personal property. This kind of reminds me of like the Tina Watson case, where Gabe Watson's family was going and trying to take stuff from Tina's family.
Yeah, and remember at this time, they had been divorced for a while, so it's not like they had shared the home or anything like that. It was her things, like they were her thing.
On April 12th, 2012, some laws were altered to limit what type of hearsay statements could be used as evidence in the trial. And this was going to be used as a benefit towards Drew, so they wouldn't be able to use certain statements from Kathleen or Stacy since they weren't present. The laws were reversed because there were already some laws in place, like the forfeiture by wrongdoing, which is when someone has made another person unable to testify against them in court. The police believed that this applied to Drew Peterson, saying that he made Stacy unable to testify against the Savio case in court. Because of this, they were able to take statements from Kathleen and Stacy and use them in the trial.
In August of 2012, a man named Jeff Pachter stated that he was offered $25,000 by Peterson to murder Savio, but that he refused. On September 6, 2012, Peterson was found guilty of the murder of Kathleen Savio. On November 16th of 2012, Peterson requested a new trial. He based this request on ineffective assistance of counsel. So he said that his lawyer, Joel Brodsky, had not offered him effective counsel, and he had 5 main reasons for why he felt that he should be granted a new trial. He said that Joel Brodsky signed a publicity contract, creating a conflict of interest. So he was kind of reveling in the limelight of this case. Yeah. He couldn't really offer good counsel for Drew because he was more concerned with being famous and having his name out there constantly. The second reason was that Drew Peterson alleged that Joel Brodsky had threatened to reveal confidential information. The third reason was that Joel Brodsky misrepresented his trial expertise and experience, so he wasn't nearly the hotshot that he kind of presented himself as. The fourth reason was quite a doozy. It was alleged that Joel Brodsky only wanted to help Drew because he thought he would get his name out there, that he would be famous, and so that was really the only reason he was in the case at all. Joel set up a series of interviews for Drew to keep his name out there, and one of these was an interview with Steve Dahl, who was a radio show host. Drew and Steve called up this show kind of impromptu. It wasn't really set up, but Steve Dahl had been sort of making fun of this case and making fun of Peterson. He had this ongoing shtick where he would sort of imitate Peterson. So Drew and Joel Brodsky called up and they had their conversation, and over the course of this conversation, Brodsky suggested that Steve Dahl host a Win a Date with Drew contest. This was seen as being really in bad taste. It was really a gross move. Either he didn't commit the crimes and it was just kind of a disrespectful nod to it, or he did commit it, and then that just opens up all kinds of gross implications.
And a lack of respect.
Yeah. So Steve Dahl declined this offer and decided that that would not be a good thing to do. So Brodsky moved on and actually suggested that Drew be on another reality show called Bunny Ranch Reality Show. This also didn't work out for them, but Brodsky set up many, many interviews. It seems like Drew was always on TV, always on the radio, getting interviewed all over the place. So we're going to play you a couple of clips from some of the interviews that he did over the years, and then we'll talk about him in a minute.
What do you tell your children now? I mean, Stacy Peterson's been gone for more than a year. What do you tell the two young children that you had with her? When they say, "Where's mommy?" What do you say?
She's on vacation still, and she's not coming back. My little girl's starting to ask a lot more questions about it, but
why do you say she's not coming back?
I don't say she's not coming back. What did I say?
Well, you just said that. You just said, I tell them she's on vacation, she's not coming back.
I didn't mean to say that. She's on vacation, and we don't know when she's coming back. So,
you enjoy being in the spotlight?
Sometimes it's fun, meeting celebrities. Being with you guys here today, that's fun.
But you're here to talk about...
It's fun being here today?
Yeah, sure.
Why is that?
Well, I get to meet you.
Okay.
So those were kind of creepy considering the context.
Yeah, not only does he sound super confident when he's talking, but he also seems very confused. He goes back and forth when he says some things.
Yeah, he might have had some Freudian slips there, and overall he just sounds happy to be in the limelight and to have all this attention on him.
Rather than knowing what he's in the limelight for, it seems like he's just happy that he's there.
So Drew made these appearances. He appeared on Larry King Live. He was on CBS. He even had interviews from prison on these radio stations. There was also a movie made about this case called Drew Peterson, Untouchable. And during the planning stages of this, Drew actually sent a cease and desist letter asking them to stop making the movie. He said it was incorrect information and that it would harm him because it painted him in this bad light and that it was defamatory. But this movie did end up being made, and Rob Lowe played him. Afterwards, his lawyer said that he thought the movie was funny, that he laughed at all the quote-unquote incorrect parts of it, so his efforts didn't work. The final reason in Drew Peterson's case for ineffective assistance of counsel was that Brodsky encouraged a media blitz, so he was sensationalizing the crimes and Drew Peterson himself, and that this was really detrimental to Drew's case. It was even stated that the 2008 engagement to Christina Raines was Brodsky's idea, that it would make Drew seem more sympathetic if he was engaged. And this was confirmed by Christina herself. In an interview, she said that their engagement was just a stunt for Drew's name to be out there, for his image to be kind of softened. And I mean, legally, he could not get married again because he was still married to Stacy Peterson. We have a little bit of that interview, and we'll play it for you now.
How did you become engaged to him? When did you become engaged to him?
It was never an engagement.
What was it then?
It was more like a stunt.
A stunt?
Yes.
On whose part?
On Drew, so he could be in the media.
Did you know it was a stunt when...
Well, he had told me that his lawyer had wanted him to be in the media and wanted to propose to someone at a restaurant.
And then what happened? So he said to you, we're friends, we're dating, you want to be part of this stunt? Is that how it went down?
That's how it went down, but I would not go with it. I would not go along with it.
What would you say to him?
I told him no, and he had said, well, if it comes out that I'm engaged to someone, it's not really true.
So you were never engaged to him, is that what you're saying?
No, I was never engaged to him.
On February 21st of 2013, the judge ended up denying this new trial that Peterson was requesting based on the accusations against his lawyer, and he just sentenced Drew to 38 years in prison. It was said that Drew started delivering a long and self-pitying statement and talked about how he didn't kill Savio, which he could be making his own statement, but also he could just be trying to get in the spotlight again. So it's kind of hard based on all of the stuff that happened with him and his lawyer. On February 9th, 2015, Drew was charged with putting a hit on James Glasgow. A prison mate named Beast mentioned to Drew that he could take care of Glasgow, and Drew says that he laughed it off at first, that later he talked to the man about it and helped create a plan, and that he offered $10,000 for the hit. The conversation was recorded, and the jury only took an hour to find him guilty.
Yeah, so that doesn't bode well for the rest of his charges and stuff. You know, he's saying he's innocent, and then he orders a hit on, you know, an important part of this case. And
exactly. And a year after these charges were up, Peterson was found guilty of solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire, which is kind of ironic also because Pachter even said that he had tried to hire him to murder Savio. So it doesn't seem unlikely that it really did happen, that he tried to get a hit on Glasgow.
Yeah, he had a history of this, so it's really not that far-fetched that this happened, even though Drew would like us to think that it's not exactly what it looks like, but they got him pretty good there.
Yeah. And on July 29th, 2016, Judge Richard Brown sentenced Peterson to 40 years in prison after the completion of his 38-year prison sentence on Savio's death, which I think it's kind of interesting that a hit on someone got 2 more years in prison than a murder.
Yeah, that
seems a little out of place, but
it's a little off, but at least he'll be in jail forever.
On February 21st, 2017, Peterson was determined a, quote, threat to safety and security of the department at Menard Correctional Facility. He was moved to the Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution in Indiana, and Drew said that once he got there, he was living the good life, and it was like being in daycare compared to the old correctional facility.
In April of 2019, the wrongful death suit that we mentioned earlier was dropped because the lawyers failed to show up to the hearings. They failed to show up to 2 different hearings, and they just couldn't move the case forward, so it was dropped. Stacy's body has never been found. She's still considered a missing person. There hasn't been any movement on where she might be, but even Drew's own son, Stephen, believes that his father had something to do with both Savio's death and Stacy Peterson's disappearance.
Stephen even said, quote, I don't want to come out and say he did it, but I'm sure he did it. You kind of look back and think maybe she did know something or maybe something did happen, but at the time, we never thought twice about it, end quote.
Yeah, so when his own son is saying that he's pretty sure that his own father did it and that looking back he could kind of see some red flags, that's pretty telling. Stacy's sister Cassandra has always believed that Drew was responsible for her disappearance. She has always been someone that's very vocal in trying to find her sister. She's always out there trying to find her. She feels like law enforcement kind of brushed off the case and didn't really do their due diligence in trying to find Stacy's body. She also stated that she thinks that the state's attorney and the state police are gearing up to charge Drew Peterson with Stacy Peterson's murder, but that she doesn't really think justice can truly be served unless they have the body. So she's been very involved in trying to find her sister's body. She thinks at this point that she knows where Stacy's body is. She thinks it's in a certain part of Lake Michigan. She isn't just basing this on a gut instinct. She spent a lot of years and a lot of money getting sonar images of the area to try to find remains. So she thinks she's pinpointed where the body is, and she has gathered images of this area from different times of day, different angles. She really wants to prove that the body is there. And we have these images that she collected on our website if you want to go check it out. They're kind of hard to read if you don't really know what you're looking at. So we provided one image that's unaltered, that's just as she presented it, and then one with our kind of interpretation of it. Unfortunately, Cassandra has run out of money at this point, and she needs help to hire a dive team that's willing to go and retrieve the body. The police aren't really willing to help her. She says they've kind of taunted her, like, we're not really going to take this seriously unless you show us a bone. So she's trying to kind of gather support to send some divers down and collect the remains. Now she's asking for help because she needs to figure out the conditions, figure out pretty much every detail of this area where she thinks her sister's body is, so that divers can go down and retrieve the remains. She has started a GoFundMe, which we'll link to on our page, and she also has a website that we have a link to that you can go check out for more information, or if you have questions or any information to give Cassandra, you can contact her directly through that website. If you have any information about where Stacy Peterson might be, please contact the Illinois State Police at 815-726-6377. And we wanted to kind of leave you with some of Cassandra's own words. So we're going to play a clip of an interview with her now.
You know, why is this so important for you? Because Stacy was all I had. She was just my everything, and that was taken away from me, and I'm not going to let that go.
So that's really sad to hear. You know, she spent a lot of her life and a lot of money, a lot of energy to find justice for her sister, and I think she feels like she's so close and so far, you know.
Like, something that's right within reach is just so hard to grab.
Drew Peterson has appealed to the Supreme Court, and every appeal ends in his conviction being upheld. So it doesn't look like he's probably going to get out anytime soon, if ever.
And that's kind of where we leave the case. It's still a missing person. Stacy Peterson has never been found. Even though the sonar imaging is there, there's no 100% that it is her. It could be someone else, or it could just be the way the ground looks. You never know. And
I think even in some of the court documents it was mentioned that there may even be other bodies in the area. So it seems like there might be a lot more investigation that needs to be done into that area, and it's just kind of sad that the police won't help her, or at least dispel it as a possibility. You know, if they have information that that's definitely not her or something like that, they could just say, no, this is the wrong direction.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We appreciate you guys listening in. If you have any feedback, please go join our Abyss group on Facebook. We love to hear from you. We can discuss cases. You can write us personally, and we just love the support. So go ahead and like us, subscribe, rate us, follow, all those fun things. So that way you can hear when we have a new episode out. They come out every other week, so make sure you stay tuned. Don't forget that we have bloopers at the end of every episode in case you want to hear something that lightens the mood a little bit so you don't end on such a sad note.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. This is Hallie.
What kind of opening is that? So today we're going to talk about two stories. I already forgot.
Did you jump into the abyss?
Yeah.
You said the abyss last time?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even catch it. I'm sorry. So we're going to... I was like, are you clapping at me? Am I a dog? Hut 2. In Chicago, Illinois. And she was working as an accountant.
Illinois.
Oh my god.
It looked as though it was... No. Shaking your head.
Oh, I was singing Jump On It. I'm sorry, I didn't even know I was shaking my head. It was still stuck in my head. And then when you like paused it in my head, I was like, jump on it again. And then I was like,
I was like, what am I doing wrong?
You were doing perfect. I'm sorry. Ignore me.
A friend.
A friend.